All right, so good morning. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started for today. This is Political Science 1, Section 30672. It is Monday, April 27th. You can tell it's Monday, April 27th, 2020. My name is Paul Savoy, and this morning, several things we're going to go ahead and accomplish. First thing, I'll give you some updates, some announcements, reminders relating to the class, particularly with regard to upcoming assignments that are due. Then we will spend the bulk of our time together this morning dealing with any questions that you might have about the most immediate upcoming assignment due in this class, which is test number 2, which, as you know from Canvas in multiple places, is due this coming Wednesday. That is April 29th at 11:59 p.m. So any questions that you have, I'll be going ahead and doing the best I can to respond to those. And then finally, we will go ahead and look a little bit ahead, talking a little bit about the next assignment that we're going to be working on after test number 2 is turned in. And that is to take an in-depth look at the U.S. Congress, the national government branch that is responsible for a number of things, but its primary responsibility is making national government laws. So I'll give you a brief overview of the Congress notes, which I've just gone ahead and posted on our Canvas page in the modules section. Give you a brief overview about Congress, what the notes say, but also talk in more broad terms about where Congress fits in the next section that we're going to be talking about in this class, dealing with the 3 national government branches. So that's pretty much what we're going to be working on this morning. So why don't we go ahead and get to it? Just a couple of quick reminders, though. The first one, of course, is, as always, our weekly Zoom get-togethers are recorded, so you can take a look at this recording. Normally, it's made available via the Conference Zoom link on our Canvas homepage, normally about 12 hours after the recording ends. So if you click on the Conference Zoom link in the left-hand menu on our Canvas homepage, then click on the recordings link, you can find the date for this recording, click on that link, and then provide the password that I gave you in the Canvas announcement from this past Friday, reminding you about this meeting and the link and the password and all that. So if you plug in that password, you can go ahead and get access to this full recording and any other recordings that we have made for this class since we've gone completely online. So just a couple of quick reminders. If you have further questions relating to test number 2, after today or after this morning, you'll have 2 more opportunities to ask me questions, though of course you can always send me a Canvas message or an email, ask your questions that way. But remember, this afternoon, and again, this is Monday, this afternoon from 2:30 until 3:30 in the afternoon, and again, this coming Wednesday from 2:30 to 3:30 Pacific Daylight Time, that is the day that the test is due, I'll be doing my regular twice weekly virtual student hours. And so that is the time. Remember, during the virtual student hours, I'm not lecturing, I'm not doing anything specifically related to this class, but I am available to answer any questions that you have about any of our assignments, anything having to do with the class, or anything else that you think that I might be able to help you with. So again, this afternoon, 2:30 to 3:30, and again on Wednesday afternoon, 2:30 to 3:30, my regularly scheduled virtual student hours. And if you want to go ahead and access those, all you have to do is to go ahead and click onto our Canvas homepage for this class and scroll down the homepage just past the picture where it says basic course information. You will see the Zoom link for the virtual student hours, as well as the password that you will need to plug in to access those virtual student hours. And so remember, our virtual student hours, that Zoom link is located in a different place than the weekly Zoom meetings that we are doing, like we are doing right now. So you have those opportunities as well to get your questions answered, and you can go ahead and send me questions via email or Canvas message. So let's go ahead at this point and talk a little bit about test number 2. And if anyone pops onto the recording by that point, you can ask any questions that you might have about test number 2 as well. Let me just remind you, though I did talk a little bit about this last week, let me just remind you a little bit about the basic logistics of the test. To get to test number 2 on our Canvas homepage, simply click on the Assignments tab in the left-hand menu. And then once you get to that screen, scroll down to where it says test number 2, click on that link, and it takes you right there. So just a few reminders about test number 2. It is a completely open book and open note test. It is not timed. We're not using proctorial or anything like that. So you can kind of work on test number 2 at your leisure. Remember, the due date for test number 2 is this coming Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. But also remember, for test number 2 and for every assignment in this class, the 3-day grace period does apply. So you'll have an additional 72 hours once we reach that Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. deadline. You'll have an additional 3 days to complete the test and submit it to me via Canvas. And if you submit the test within that 3-day grace period, I will accept the test at full credit. In other words, I will not deduct points for the test being late. And again, that goes for every assignment that we are doing in this class for this semester. As far as submitting the test to me via Canvas, of course, all those instructions are listed there for you on the assignment guidelines for the test itself. But there are 2 ways that you can go ahead and submit test number 2 to me via Canvas. One way, of course, is to go ahead and submit it via a text entry box that you can access on the assignment page for test number 2. So you can either actually type your text into that entry box, or you can complete the test in a separate document like a Word document or something like that, and then cut and paste it into the text entry box and submit it that way. Or if you'd rather, you can submit your test to me as a file and just upload the file to me via Canvas. But remember, if you choose to upload a file, the only 3 file formats that I accept would be a doc file, a docx file, or a PDF file. So please do not submit Google Doc files or anything like that. Also, please do not submit your test to me via email or via a Canvas message attachment. Again, the only way you should be submitting the test to me is via Canvas itself, either through the text entry box for test number 2, or submitting, once again, a doc file, a docx file, or a PDF file. And that's how that works. And if you have any questions about actually submitting the test to me, as well as any other question about the test, do please feel free to send me an email, a Canvas message, or stop by during my virtual student hours, either this afternoon, Monday, or Wednesday afternoon as well. Now, as far as the test, as we talked about last week, it's the same 2-part format that you're used to from our first test towards the beginning of the semester, back when this class was still meeting live in person, face-to-face on the LAC campus. Part 1 is the short answer section. And if you take a look at test number 2 itself, in part 1, I have 22 terms listed there for you. Those 22 terms comes from the sections, the information that we've been learning about since test number 1, because remember, this is not a cumulative test. So it covers our discussions and what you've learned, what you've read about, the videos that you've looked at, the notes that you've reviewed on the topics of public opinion, mass media, political parties, interest groups, as well as campaigns and elections. So take a look at those 22 terms, figure out of those terms, which 8 can you do the best job answering. And once you choose the 8 terms that you're going to answer in about 3 to 4 complete sentences each, you are giving me a basic definition of that term. And you are also telling me why that term is significant, why it's important, kind of how it fits in the larger scheme of information that we've been talking about and you've been learning about in this class. And remember, each of those 8 terms in part 1 is worth a maximum of 7.5 points each. for a maximum of 60 points possible for part 1 of the test. Part 2, the mini essay section, there are 4 possible questions for you to answer listed there in the testing guidelines. Read through those 4 questions carefully. Choose the one question of the 4 that you feel that you can do the best job answering, and give me your response in approximately 5 paragraphs. Now, a lot of people ask me about that. 5 paragraphs. Can I get away with less than 5 paragraphs? Can I get away with answering more than 5 paragraphs? And the answer is always the same. 5 paragraphs is a general guideline. If I don't give that general guideline, someone will give me 3 sentences and say that's a perfect answer. Other people will write 10 pages and say that's a wonderful answer. 5 paragraphs is about the length that you want to shoot for. If your answer ends up being a little bit less than 5 paragraphs, that's fine, as long as you are sure to answer all of the elements of the question. You can also feel free to go somewhat over that 5 paragraph standard as well, if you feel you need a bit more time and space to fully answer all elements of the question. And that 5 paragraph approximately response is worth the remaining 40 points possible for test number 2. Remember, unlike our first test, our in-person test, when we were still meeting live on campus, you do not need to provide me with an essay outline for your part 2 essay. That we just don't need that. Doesn't make sense, since this is an open book, open note, open video test. No need to create an outline and submit it to me with part 2 of your test. So that is how it works. And since we do not have anyone with us live at this point, obviously I don't have any questions to answer. So again, if you have questions about anything having to do with test number 2, again, see me, my virtual office hours this afternoon. That's Monday, the 27th of April, 2:30 to 3:30 Pacific Daylight Time. Also this coming Wednesday, April 29th, again, 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon Pacific Daylight Time, and ask me the question, or between now and the end of the 3-day grace period, you can go ahead, send me a Canvas message, send me an email, whatever you need to do. So I figure since I don't have any questions with regard to test number 2, I will go ahead and give you a bit of a preview, a bit of an overview of the next assignment that you'll be working on, the assignment that will be due a week from this coming Wednesday. And let me just double check the date on that. So a week from this coming Wednesday is Wednesday, May 6th. And that is when our next assignment will be due. That is a discussion forum post. And that will be covering what you're going to be learning about after test number 2, dealing with one of the 3 national government branches, that is the U.S. Congress. And so, as I said earlier this morning, I went ahead and posted the notes up on Canvas in the modules page dealing with the U.S. Congress. I'm going to give you a brief overview of those notes in just a couple of minutes. And then a bit later on today, I will go ahead and put up the discussion forum post assignment for Congress that's due a week from this coming Wednesday. And I'll also put up on our modules page, along with the notes, the crash course videos that you should be looking at when you take a look at Congress as well. I recognize that most of you are still working on test number 2. That's fine. You still have time. But I want to go ahead and get all the Congress information up so that once you are done with test number 2, you can go ahead and start working on that next assignment without missing a beat. So anyway, kind of here's the overview. And think about what we've already talked about in this course so far during the semester to this point. So we began the semester back when we were still live on campus, face-to-face. Meeting every Monday and Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. We went ahead and began the semester by talking a lot about the basic foundation, the basic blueprint of the U.S. political system that is our current U.S. Constitution. We talked about the history of the U.S. as 13 American colonies. We talked about the process leading up to the American Revolution. And we also talked about the first attempt by folks in the new United States in 1776 at creating a governing system for the country, for this new nation, that disastrous first constitution called the Articles of Confederation. And then finally, we talked in considerable detail about our current governmental blueprint, the one that we still are using today in 2020, our current US Constitution. And at that point, we took test number 1. Then we went into what we thought was going to be our temporary online period for this class, which turned out to be more than temporary, taking us through to the end of the semester. And since we've been online, our focus of attention has been building on the foundation of information and knowledge that we learned already about the US Constitution. So as you are well aware, as you are working on test number 2 right now, we've been spending our time learning about the basic linkage mechanisms that operate in the US political system. That is the various ways that we attempt to continuously and in a robust way transmit information back and forth between the people and the government, which is key if you want to maintain a functional democratic political system, even a representative democracy as we have in the United States. So over the past few weeks, as you're all too familiar with at this point, we've been talking about kind of going through and deeply analyzing the structure and function and the effectiveness of our 4 main linkage mechanisms in the US, starting with mass media, then political parties, interest groups, as well as campaigns and elections. And now that we are completing that section, now that you are working on test number 2, talking about everything about linkage mechanisms, it makes sense that the next logical step in this class is to go ahead and build on that foundation. And that is to talk a little bit about the 3 main branches of the national government. That is Congress, the folks who make national government laws, among other things, the president, whose main job, among other things, is to enforce national government laws once Congress makes them. And then finally, the judicial branch, the court system, whose main job is to interpret national government laws to tell us what they actually mean in practice. And it makes sense now that we understand the various ways that government and the people attempt to communicate with each other through linkage mechanisms. It makes sense now to take a look at these basic political structures in our national government: Congress, the president, and the courts. And basically, what you'll notice as we go through in the ensuing several weeks and talk first about Congress this coming week, and then the presidency after that, and the courts after that, is that the framers, when they wrote our current US Constitution back in the summer of 1787, had a very specific plan in mind. Remember, we talked at the beginning of the semester that the framers, as they were creating the structure of the national government in the Constitution, wanted to make sure that the national government would be strong enough, but not too strong. In other words, that the national government would be strong enough to maintain order in society, but not so strong to threaten the people's natural rights. And if you recall from our discussions earlier in the semester, we said that one of the ways the framers attempted to do that would be by creating this separation of powers, checks and balances system. And if you think back to when we talked about this at the beginning of the semester, separation of powers and checks and balances, this is one of the 2 major ways that the framers tried to create a national government that was both strong enough but not too strong. And if you recall, we said with separation of powers that the framers attempted to break the US national government down into its 3 most basic component parts. And so that you would have one group of folks, one separate group of folks within the structure of the national government making national government laws. That would ultimately be Congress. You would have another group of folks separately in the national government. That's the executive branch led by the president, who is then enforcing those national government laws once they're made. And finally, you have a third separate group within the national government structure, the judiciary, the court system, and their main job was to interpret the laws, to tell the public and the government what the laws actually mean in practice. And this idea that the framers had, well, that the framers actually borrowed from some classical liberal political philosophers of the time, this idea of separation of powers was that if each of these three basic functions of the national government were given to different groups within the national government, that would allow the national government to be strong enough, but not too strong, because it would be the opposite way of organizing a national government from what the British government did. Remember, we talked earlier in the semester, the British government used what we call fusion of powers. And in that system, the same folks, the British Parliament, the House of Commons, led by the Prime Minister, not only did they get to make the laws, so not only did they have the legislative function, but they also got to enforce the laws once they made them. And to some extent, they also had the ability to interpret the laws themselves as well. So they had all three of those basic functions all rolled into one governing group. And the framers said that was a really bad idea, that they did not want to repeat that model in the United States, because that allowed the British national government to become overly powerful, to abuse that power, to spin out of control and threaten people's natural rights. And so that's why the separation of powers system came into being in the first place. Now, here's the thing. An element of separation of powers that we didn't emphasize all that much when we were talking about it early in the semester, but it becomes very important for our purposes now as we move into talking about Congress, the president, and the courts, is the fact that the framers assumed that if this separation of powers system was going to work, if it truly was going to be able to make the national government strong enough, but not too strong, then the framers assumed that each of the three national government branches, Congress, the president, and the courts, would each have roughly equal levels of power and authority. In other words, no one of the three national government branches should be significantly more powerful than the others, or separation of powers would likely break down. And so here's the thing. That's the way it's been for most of our history under the US Constitution. For most of our history, Congress, the president, and the courts have had roughly equal levels of power and authority. At some points in history, one branch might become a bit more influential than the others, but there wasn't this huge disparity in power amongst the three national government branches. Again, for a lot of our history under the Constitution. But guess what? In more recent decades, the power balance amongst the three national government branches has become decidedly unbalanced. So that today, most people would argue that the president, the executive branch, is way more powerful than Congress, way more powerful than the courts. That's not what the framers wanted. That's not what the framers anticipated happening. And so one of the questions that we want to answer over the next several weeks as we talk about Congress, the president, and the courts is to take a look at this. Does it make sense that today the executive branch, the president, is significantly more powerful than either Congress or the courts? The framers thought that that would be a bad idea, but is it a necessary thing today? Or is it a bad idea? Is it bad for American democracy? Does it throw the system that the framers created out of balance? And so that's what we're looking at over the next several weeks. And we're also looking at this question of how much or how little do each of the three national government branches still fit how the framers intended for them to function back when they created them in 1787. So in just a couple of minutes, I will go ahead and give you a brief overview of the Congress notes that are posted up on Canvas. But before I do that, since I've been talking about separation of powers, we've had one of your classmates join us live. And so I'm going to stop just for a moment. And before you came on, I did offer the opportunity for anyone who wanted to ask any questions that they might be having about test number 2, which we are working on right now and is due this coming Wednesday, not counting the 3-day grace period, of course, but is due this coming Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. So let me just stop for a second and ask, are there any questions about anything having to do with test number 2 right now? And if you have a question, you can either unmute your mic and ask the question, or you can write the question in the group chat if you don't feel like talking this early on a Monday morning. So again, any questions about anything having to do with test number 2, which is coming up due this Wednesday? I'll just wait for a second. Okay, great. All right, so again, if you have questions between now and when the test is due, plus the grace period, you can drop by my virtual student hours this Monday afternoon, today, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Same thing this coming Wednesday. You can also send me a Canvas message, send me an email. I'm happy to deal with your questions dealing with test number 2 or anything else. So there you go. So anyway, let me get back to what I was talking about. So what I want to do for the remaining time that we have is to go ahead and give you a brief overview of the notes dealing with the U.S. Congress, which, as I said, I just posted a little while ago up on the modules page on our Canvas site for this class. As I said, a little bit later on today, I will go ahead and post the crash course videos for Congress in the Congress module that I just made available to you. I'll also put up the discussion forum post for Congress. But remember, that discussion forum post is not due for a while. It's not due until a week from this Wednesday. So it's not due until next Wednesday. That is May 6th. But let me give you an overview of the notes. And if you take a look at the Canvas notes on Congress that I just put up, you will notice that they are pretty lengthy. They are pretty comprehensive. So I can't go through the entire packet with you in the about 16 minutes that we have left together this morning. But what I can do is kind of let you know on what I think are the key points in the notes, and also the key things that you should look for as you go through and read the notes, the Congress notes, in more detail. And I'm assuming you're not going to get to that until obviously after you finish up with test number 2. So here's the thing. If you take a look at the format for the Congress notes that I've given you, what you will notice is that I use the same basic layout, the same basic format for our discussion of Congress as I will with the notes that you'll see next week dealing with the presidency, and then the week after that in dealing with the federal court system, the judicial branch, right? And so the way I lay out the notes for all 3 national government branches will look like this. I begin each set of notes by talking about how the framers themselves perceived, how they saw that particular branch back when they were creating it in the summer of 1787 during the Philadelphia Convention. So I'll tell you a little bit about what the framers intended for that branch to accomplish and how much power they thought that branch was going to be able to handle in carrying out whatever function they intended for it. Then I will tell you, then I'll talk about the fact that how Congress perceived each of the three national government branches then, back in the summer of 1787, is very different from how we perceive them now in the year 2020. So the next section in the notes, I'll try and explain how we got from there to here. How did we get from how the framers perceived a particular branch like Congress versus how we, the American people, perceive that branch today? Because as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, how the framers saw Congress and its power potential and its influence potential is very different from how we perceive Congress today. And so I'll try to explain for each of the three national government branches how we got from there to here, how we got from what the framers thought about that branch to what we think about that branch today. So I'll try and make that connection between the two. And then we'll spend the rest of the time in each section of the notes going over the basic functions, the basic jobs that the framers gave to each of the three national government branches. So for example, if you take a look at the Congress notes, the bulk of the Congress notes starting in section 4, section Roman numeral number 4, I go through and talk a little bit about the 6 major functions, the 6 major jobs that the framers gave to Congress when they created it in Article 1 of the Constitution. And I'll talk a little bit about how those jobs, how those functions are carried out, and how those jobs have changed from 1787 until the present day. So that's the basic format that I follow, with the Congress notes for next week and the presidency notes for the week after, and the judicial branch notes for the week after that. So does that make sense? Any questions about that before we delve into and talk about some key points in the Congress notes? Okay, so great. Thank you. I appreciate that. All good. Got the virtual thumbs up there. So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Congress, because as I said, when the framers sat down to write our current U.S. Constitution during that very hot, humid summer in 1787, the very first major job that they tackled in creating the Constitution is that they created the legislative branch of the U.S. national government. They created this institution called Congress. And that's why if you take a look at a copy of the U.S. Constitution, if you Google that, look at a copy of the Constitution online, you will see very first thing after the preamble, Article 1 of the Constitution deals with the U.S. Congress. Now, in creating the U.S. Congress, in a sense, the framers didn't have as big of a job as they would have in the next section of the Constitution, in Article 2, because in Article 2, as we'll talk about during our get-together here on Zoom next Monday morning, the framers were creating the presidency, the executive branch of the U.S. national government. And if you recall back to early in the semester and our discussion of our first Constitution in the United States, the Articles of Confederation, you'll remember that under the Articles, there was no executive branch. There really was no president of the United States. There was no one who was specifically tasked with the job of enforcing national government laws. So there was no executive branch. The framers had to create it from scratch when they created it, the presidency, in our current U.S. Constitution. But guess what? Under the Articles of Confederation, there was a legislative branch. There was an organization already in existence in 1787 under the Articles of Confederation called the U.S. Congress. So when the framers sat down to create Article 1, to create Congress in our new Constitution that they were creating, I think at first they thought, well, let's get the easier job done first. We already have Congress. It's not going to take that long. So let's just get that out of the way first. Well, Obviously, it ended up taking them a lot longer to create Congress in Article 1 than they initially thought, because remember what we said earlier in the semester. Congress under our current Constitution looks very different than Congress did under the Articles of Confederation. Remember, we talked about the fact that because of the compromise on democracy that Hamilton's group made with Madison's group, we end up with a bicameral, a two-house, two-chamber Congress under our current Constitution, as opposed to the old one-house, one-chamber, unicameral version under the Articles. So Congress took the framers longer than they initially thought it would. Oh, well. But here's the thing. If you look at the very top of the Congress notes, if you take a look at section Roman numeral number 1, what it tells you is that the framers assumed, as they were creating the Constitution, that Congress would become the most powerful and the most potentially dangerous of the three national government branches. So in other words, as the framers sat down in Philadelphia in 1787 to create the governmental system that we still have today, they strongly believed that of the three national government branches, Congress, the president, and the courts, the framers believed that Congress would have the greatest potential to become too powerful, to abuse that power, to spin out of control, and potentially threaten people's natural rights. Okay? Now, if that sounds kind of strange to you from our perspective here in the year 2020, I can see why that is, because guess what? Fast forward to today, when political scientists and others conduct public opinion surveys, and we ask the American people their opinions about the national government, and do we believe that there are some parts of the national government that are more powerful and more potentially dangerous than the others? When we ask that question today, pretty much no one says that they fear Congress. Pretty much no one today says that Congress has the greatest potential to become too powerful, to abuse its power, to threaten the people's natural rights. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. If we ask most people today, which of the three national government branches do you believe is the weakest, the least dangerous, most people say Congress. Most people today think Congress is kind of a big joke. And we know that because there are lots of jokes out there about Congress. Now, most of them use language that I can't repeat here on Zoom because my dean will get mad at me, the kinds of things I don't say in polite company, right? But here's an example of a joke about Congress from today that I can say because it's clean. What is the opposite of progress? Congress. Think about that for a second. I know it's not very funny, but at least it's clean, right? But what that joke is saying, Congress today, not very effective, don't get a lot of stuff done. And that certainly implies that no one today is really afraid of Congress. No one thinks that Congress today is going to abuse anyone's power. So today we see Congress as being this really weak joke, but that's not how the framers perceived Congress back in 1787. The framers believed that unless they were really careful, Congress would spin out of control and would abuse Americans' natural rights in the same way that the British version of Congress did, the Parliament did, back when we were a series of 13 British colonies. So the key point in the first section of your Congress notes in Roman numeral number 1, and it's really important, is that because the framers were so afraid of Congress potentially abusing its power, that they very carefully created Congress. They spent a lot of time and detail in Article 1 of the Constitution, very carefully laying out, very carefully detailing what Congress could do and what Congress couldn't do. So as it says in the notes in Article 1, the framers really worked hard to try and box Congress in, to make sure that Congress had all the power to do all the things that it needed to do for the good of the country, but nothing else. That Congress wasn't given any extra additional power that it could use to abuse power, to threaten the people's natural rights, that sort of thing. So the framers, because they were so scared of Congress, were very careful in how they designed Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, how did we get from there to here? How do we get from the framers fearing Congress dramatically to today where we don't fear Congress? Well, look what it says there in section 1 of the notes. The reason why we don't fear Congress today, the reason why today we think that Congress is a big joke, is because the framers did such an effective job of boxing Congress in way back in 1787. In other words, the framers so carefully limited the power of Congress that Congress has never proven to be a real threat to our natural rights, to our civil liberties and civil rights as folks living in the United States. So that makes sense. It's logical. That's how we got from there to here. The framers feared abuse of power by Congress, so they very carefully limited what Congress could do in Article 1 of the Constitution, and they were so good at boxing Congress in that today we see Congress as being this big and ineffective joke. Does that make sense? Any questions about that first section of the notes for Congress? And again, you can unmute your mic and ask, or you can put a question in the group chat. Is that all making sense to us so far? Okay, great. So the next major point that I want to highlight in the notes in the last few minutes that we have left is take a look at section 2, Roman numeral number 2 in your Congress notes. And what that tells you is that today it is very easy to understand what motivates individual members of Congress to do the job that they do. Because guess what? Most of the rest of the notes listed there for Congress lay out the 6 basic jobs, the 6 basic functions that Congress has. And here's the thing. When the framers created Congress in 1787, the framers gave Congress way too many things to do. They gave Congress way too many jobs. And so here's the thing. There is no way that members of Congress today or earlier on in our history could possibly carry out all 6 of their jobs equally well all of the time. It was completely impossible. Congress had too much to do. Now, because of this, because Congress has too much to do, individual members of Congress, once they get elected, have to make a decision. They have to figure out, okay, well, I'm serving in Congress, whichever house I'm serving in, the House of Representatives or the Senate, which of these 6 basic jobs of Congress am I going to focus on? Because I can't do all 6 things equally well all of the time. So what's my emphasis going to be? What's my focus going to be? So the big question that's answered in point 2 in section 2 of your Congress notes is a pretty simple one. How do members of Congress figure out which of their 6 jobs they're going to emphasize and which of their 6 jobs they're going to de-emphasize? And the answer is really simple, but the answer is really powerful. What it says in section 2 is that members of Congress will tend to emphasize those 6 jobs that they have that help them get reelected. Remember earlier in the semester, we talked about this concept called the reelection obsession. And we said that once someone gets elected to a position like, say, a seat in Congress, that once they get elected the first time, their overwhelming objective and obsession becomes doing whatever they have to do to keep getting reelected again and again and again and again, as long as they possibly can, to keep their butts in office for as long as they can. Well, guess what? Members of Congress have figured out a pretty smart thing. They have figured out that some of their 6 jobs, if they carry them out consistently and diligently, will help them get reelected again and again and again. Whereas others of their 6 basic functions as members of Congress will either not help them get reelected or might actually hurt their reelection chances. And so what that means, if you are the average self-interested, reelection obsessed member of Congress, you are going to spend most of your time carrying out those jobs of Congress, those functions of Congress that will help you get reelected again and again and again and again. That's very rational, self-interested behavior. Okay. And so it's really easy to understand why members of Congress behave in the way that they do. It's really easy to understand why they favor carrying out certain functions over others, because they help them get reelected, right? Now, here's the thing. When you look at section 4 in the notes and you look in detail at the 6 basic functions of Congress, what you'll find is that all of those functions, all of those jobs that the framers gave to Congress are important for the good of the country. So ideally, members of Congress should be working on all 6 of these jobs all of the time, but they can't. So they don't. So they focus on the ones that help them get reelected, and they often ignore the rest. Now, that's good and bad, because guess what? Some of those jobs that help them, members of Congress, get reelected are good for the country. But other things that Congress should be doing that are also very good for the country, members of Congress don't do, because doing those jobs don't help them get reelected. So it's a really mixed bag. So those are sort of the highlights, sort of the basic things that I want you to look at when you go through the Congress notes in detail. And of course, I understand you're probably not going to look at those for a few days, since you're all still currently working on test number 2. So any questions left over with that brief overview of the Congress notes? Okay, so seeing nothing, let me remind you again, test number 2 due this coming Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. plus the 3-day grace period tacked onto that. Remember, if you have questions about test number 2, see me this afternoon, my virtual student hours on Zoom. See me Wednesday afternoon, my virtual student hours on Zoom, or you can always send me a Canvas message or an email. So I'll be back here, same time, same place, next week, next Monday morning, 8 to 8:45. I'll deal with any questions that you have at that point about Congress and that discussion forum post that will be due next week. And I'll also preview the notes for the next section. We talk a little bit about this thing called the presidency. So you can imagine I'll have a few interesting things to say about that next Monday morning. So until I see you next time, thanks for joining me this morning. Remember, you can review this recording off of the ConferZoom link on our Canvas page. It should be available to you in about 12 hours. Remember, your success in this class and your success in getting through all of this stuff that we are living through right now, the whole COVID-19 thing, remember, you're going to be successful. You're going to get through all of this successfully, but you're not alone. I'm here for you whenever you need me. So never hesitate to get in contact with me for anything having to do with this class, anything that you think that I can help you with. I'm here for you. We're better off together. So hang in there, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.